My fiancée said she was catching up with an old friend. An hour later, I got a Snapchat of her making out with a guy in the back of his Jeep. When I drove there and opened the door, I had always thought the quiet weeks before a wedding were supposed to feel calm, like the last stretch of a long road where you finally see the city lights ahead. That afternoon felt exactly like that. Ordinary. Too ordinary to be suspicious. I was at the apartment, half working, half daydreaming about how close we were to being done with planning and compromises. The invitations were already out. Deposits were paid. Our families had started talking as if the future was a settled fact rather than a fragile idea. Yvette told me she was going out to catch up with an old friend. She said it casually, while tying her hair in front of the mirror, already half turned toward the door. There was nothing dramatic about it. No rush, no secrecy, no argument. I nodded, asked if she would be late, and she shrugged in a way that suggested she had not thought that far ahead. She kissed my cheek, grabbed her jacket, and left. The door closed. The apartment went quiet. That should have been the end of it. I tried to focus on work. I answered emails, skimmed documents, moved numbers around without really absorbing them. Time passed in the dull, unremarkable way it usually does when nothing important is supposed to happen. I checked the clock once, then again. About an hour had gone by when my phone buzzed. It was a Snapchat notification. Not from Yvette. From an unfamiliar username. I assumed it was spam or a misfire, some algorithmic nonsense. I almost ignored it. The preview image loaded before I could stop it. The video was short, shaky, shot too close. I recognized her immediately, even before my brain accepted what my eyes were seeing. Her jacket, her hair, her hand gripping the collar of someone else's shirt. A man's face leaned in, half visible, and then his mouth was on hers. The background was unmistakable. The inside of a Jeep. The open back. The familiar sticker on the window that I had seen around town more than once. There was no sound, but it did not need any. My body reacted before my thoughts did. Heat flooded my chest. My hands went numb. I watched the clip again, slower this time, as if I could find a version where it meant something else. There wasn't one. The angle shifted for a second, and I saw her smile. Not the polite, social smile she used with strangers. The private one. The message ended there. No text. No explanation. Just the video. I sat frozen for a moment, phone in my hand, breathing shallowly like I had just run up a flight of stairs. My mind tried to grab onto alternatives. Maybe it was old. Maybe it was a setup. Maybe it was someone trying to stir trouble. All of those thoughts collapsed under the weight of small details. The jacket she had put on an hour earlier. The bracelet I had given her last winter. The way she leaned forward without hesitation. I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped against the floor. I did not call her. I did not text. I grabbed my keys and left the apartment without turning off the lights. The drive felt unreal. Traffic lights blurred together. Every red light felt like an insult. I replayed the video in my head, frame by frame, as if memorizing it would somehow give me control. The location tag from the snap had been clear enough. A bar on the edge of downtown, the kind with a parking lot behind it where people thought no one was looking. When I pulled in, my hands were steady in a way that surprised me. The Jeep was exactly where the video suggested it would be. Parked crookedly, rear facing away from the street, as if privacy could be achieved by poor alignment. I parked a few spaces away and got out. I could hear music leaking from the bar's back door. Laughter. Normal sounds from a normal night that had nothing to do with what I was about to do. I walked toward the Jeep, each step deliberate, my heartbeat loud in my ears. The back door was closed but not locked. I opened it. Yvette jerked back so fast she nearly hit her head. The man beside her turned, startled, his expression shifting from confusion to something like calculation. Up close, there was no denying who he was. Rourke. Someone I had seen before. Not a close friend, not a stranger either. A familiar face from parties, mutual gatherings, the extended edges of our social circle. The kind of person you recognize without really knowing. For a second, no one spoke. The air felt thick, heavy with the smell of alcohol and perfume. Yvette's eyes darted between me and Rourke as if looking for an exit that did not exist. I asked her what this was. My voice sounded distant to my own ears, controlled in a way that did not match what I felt. She started talking immediately, words tumbling over each other, trying to shrink the moment, to make it seem smaller than it was. She said it was not what it looked like. She said it was just a stupid lapse. She said it had gone too far too fast. Rourke watched us carefully. He did not look ashamed. He looked alert. I asked him how long this had been going on. He hesitated, then answered in a way that told me he was choosing his words with care. Long enough, he said. Longer than today. That was the moment something shifted. The story Yvette had started building cracked before it could even stand. She shot him a sharp look, and I realized, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that I was not stepping into a mistake. I was stepping into the middle of something already in motion. People had started glancing over from the bar. The situation was no longer private. I could feel eyes on us, curiosity sharpening into recognition. I closed the Jeep door, not to protect them, but to contain the scene. I asked Yvette if this was the friend she had mentioned. She did not answer right away. When she did, it was with a nod that felt more like surrender than confirmation. Rourke added something else then, something that landed harder than the video itself. He said he had been told things were complicated between us, that the engagement was more of a formality than a commitment, that I was aware there were issues. I laughed once, short and humorless, because the absurdity of it was almost impressive. The idea that my own relationship had been rewritten without my involvement was staggering. I told him that was not true, that whatever he thought he knew, it was wrong. He shrugged slightly, not defensive, not apologetic, just acknowledging a mismatch of stories. He said he could only go by what he had been told. Yvette tried to pull the conversation back under her control. She insisted that Rourke was misunderstanding things, that he was exaggerating. But her urgency betrayed her. She was no longer explaining. She was patching. I asked her directly how long she had been meeting him. She looked away. That was answer enough. The weight of that realization settled slowly, not like a blow, but like something heavy being placed on my chest. This was not a single bad decision. This was a series of choices, each one requiring the last. I stepped back from the Jeep and looked at both of them. The situation had crossed a point of no return the moment I opened that door. Whatever happened next would not be about fixing anything. It would be about uncovering it. I told Yvette we were leaving. Not together. I told her to find her own way home. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult her. The calmness of it seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another message from the same unknown account. This one contained no video. Just a single line of text, short and unmistakable, referencing a meeting that had nothing to do with tonight. I stopped, stared at the screen, and felt the scope of what I had just stepped into widen dramatically. This was not the beginning. It was the moment I finally saw it. I sat in my car for a long moment before starting the engine. The second message was still glowing on my phone, simple and devastating in how little effort it took to imply everything. It referenced a different night, a different place, one I knew she had been at without me. Not proof by itself, but confirmation that tonight was not an exception. It was a pattern. I drove home slowly, not because I needed time to think, but because I needed to keep my body from outrunning my head. My hands were steady on the wheel. That steadiness frightened me more than shaking would have. Something in me had already shifted into a mode that did not allow denial to survive. When I got back to the apartment, the lights were still on. The quiet felt heavier than before. I set my keys down carefully, as if noise might set something off. My phone buzzed again, then again. Calls this time. Messages stacking on top of each other. I ignored them. I walked through the apartment with the deliberate pace of someone entering a place they no longer trusted. The couch still held the indentation from where she had sat before leaving. Her mug was in the sink, untouched. Nothing looked different, and that made everything feel wrong. I did not start by looking for evidence. I started by sitting down and breathing until my chest stopped feeling tight. Then I stood up and went to the bedroom. Her overnight bag was missing. That alone could have meant nothing. She sometimes stayed with friends when plans ran late. But tonight, paired with everything else, it landed differently. I opened the closet. One of her jackets was gone. Not the one she had worn earlier. Another one. Something clicked into place quietly, without drama. My phone lit up again. This time it was a message from Lior. He asked if everything was okay. I stared at his name longer than necessary. Lior was one of the people who had been around us consistently. Dinners, birthdays, casual weekends. Someone who had watched us plan a wedding and talked about it like it was a shared project. The timing of his message felt off. Too neat. I replied that I had just seen something unexpected and asked if he knew where Yvette was. I kept it neutral, informational. There was a pause, long enough to be noticeable. Then he responded that she had mentioned maybe staying out late. Nothing more. That pause told me more than the words. I walked into the living room and picked up my laptop. I was not sure what I was looking for, only that sitting still was no longer an option. I opened our shared calendar. There were entries that now looked different in retrospect. Blocks of time labeled vaguely. Errands, catch-ups, work-related notes that did not line up with what I knew of her schedule. I cross-checked a date mentioned in the second message. It matched one of those blocks. The realization did not come with shock. It came with a slow tightening behind my eyes, the feeling of a picture sharpening into focus whether I wanted it to or not. I opened a drawer she usually kept tidy. It was not messy, but it was incomplete. Something had been removed recently. I found a receipt folded into the corner of the trash can, not torn, just discarded. A bar tab. Not tonight's bar. A different one. A place across town. The timestamp aligned with the same date. I sat back down, receipt in hand, and finally allowed myself to connect the dots. The Snapchat had not been a cruel coincidence. It had been a leak. Someone had wanted me to see it. Someone had decided the truth should surface now, for reasons I did not yet understand. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Rourke. He did not start with an apology or an explanation. He asked if I was okay. The audacity of it almost made me laugh, but I did not. I told him I wanted clarity, not concern. He responded with information, not excuses. He said they had been talking for weeks, that they met more than once, that tonight was not planned impulsively but fit into an existing rhythm. He added that he had assumed I knew they were reconnecting because Yvette had framed it that way. That framing mattered. It meant the deception had layers, tailored to whoever was listening. I asked him who else knew. He hesitated again, and this time the hesitation stretched long enough to feel deliberate. He eventually admitted that it was not just between them, that at least 2 people in our circle were aware, that it had been discussed casually, not as a scandal, but as something unresolved, something complicated. I thanked him for answering. I meant it. Then I ended the conversation. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. Cars passed. People lived their lives. The world did not pause for revelations like this. It just absorbed them quietly. Another message came in, this one from Yvette. It was long, too long. Paragraphs that tried to compress months into a few screens. She framed everything as confusion, miscommunication, emotional drift. She emphasized how overwhelmed she had been, how nothing had been simple. I did not reply. Instead, I forwarded the second message, the one referencing the earlier meeting, to Lior. I asked him if he recognized the date. His response came quickly this time. He said he did. He said that night had been discussed. Not in detail, but enough to register. Enough to know it was not innocent. I asked him why no one had told me. He said he thought I already knew. That sentence landed heavier than any insult could have. It implied a shared assumption that I was either complicit or irrelevant, that my role in my own relationship had been downgraded without my consent. I closed the laptop and leaned back against the couch. My head felt full, but my thoughts were orderly. There was no chaos, just accumulation. I started making a list, not written down, but mental. Dates, locations, people. Each connection made the picture clearer. Each clarity made it harder to pretend there was any version of this that could be smoothed over. When Yvette finally came home, it was well past midnight. I heard her key in the door and stood up before she entered the room. She froze when she saw me, as if surprised that I was still there. She started speaking immediately, her voice careful, measured. She tried to narrate the situation as if it were still flexible, as if the outcome was undecided. I let her talk until she ran out of momentum. Then I asked her one question. How long? She did not answer at first. Then she gave me a time frame that was longer than I had expected and shorter than the truth I already suspected. I told her I knew it did not start tonight. I told her I knew others were aware. I told her I knew the calendar entries were not random. Her composure cracked then, not dramatically, but enough to confirm that the story she had prepared was insufficient. She admitted that things had shifted months ago, that she had not planned for it to escalate, that she had compartmentalized until the compartments failed. I did not ask why. I did not ask how she could do this so close to the wedding. Those questions belonged to a version of me that no longer felt present. I told her I needed space, not as a tactic, but as a requirement. I told her we would not be sleeping in the same place. I told her that decisions would follow, but not tonight. She nodded, subdued, and gathered a few things. As she left, I realized something else that would have horrified me earlier in the evening. I felt relief, not because of what had happened, but because the uncertainty was gone. The shape of the problem was now visible. That visibility came with a cost, but it also came with direction. After the door closed, my phone buzzed once more. A message from an unknown number. It contained a screenshot. A conversation thread. Names blurred, context intact. The scale of it widened again. And I understood, finally, that this was no longer just about betrayal. It was about exposure. I did not sleep that night. Not because my thoughts were racing, but because they were lining up. Every new piece of information slotted into place with an efficiency that felt cold. The screenshot from the unknown number sat on my phone like a sealed envelope I had already opened. It showed a conversation that did not try to be romantic or dramatic. It was logistical, planning disguised as casual talk. Dates referenced without hesitation. My name appeared once, mentioned as an obstacle that could be managed. By morning, I understood that silence would not protect me. It would only preserve a version of events that had already been distorted. I started with the practical consequences. I emailed the venue and asked for a breakdown of our deposits and cancellation terms. I contacted the caterer and the photographer. Not to cancel yet, but to confirm timelines and responsibilities. I wanted facts, not leverage. The replies came back faster than I expected. Money had a way of accelerating communication. Then I called my parents. I did not dramatize anything. I explained what had happened, in order, without speculation. They listened. They asked questions. They did not interrupt. When the call ended, I felt steadier, not because they had fixed anything, but because the truth had left my chest and entered the world. Yvette texted several times throughout the morning. I read the messages without responding. They shifted in tone, moving from regret to frustration to a kind of weary defensiveness. She wanted to talk, to explain again, to contextualize. I did not doubt that she believed explanation still had value. I no longer did. By early afternoon, the story had started moving on its own. Lior called and asked to meet. I agreed, choosing a public place not out of fear, but out of principle. We sat across from each other at a small cafe, the kind that pretended intimacy while offering none. He looked uncomfortable. That was new. He admitted that the situation had been discussed more openly than he had realized at the time. Not as a betrayal, but as a complication that would resolve itself. He said people assumed Yvette would make a decision before things reached a breaking point. He said my role had been treated as fixed, predictable. I asked him if he understood what that implied. He nodded, slowly. He said he did now. From there, the conversations multiplied. People reached out, sometimes cautiously, sometimes clumsily. Some asked if the wedding was still happening. Others offered support that felt rehearsed. A few tried to mediate without understanding that mediation required two parties willing to negotiate. I listened more than I spoke. Each interaction revealed something new about how the narrative had been circulating. Rourke contacted me again, this time to clarify something that had begun to surface indirectly. He said he had not been the only one, that there had been overlap. Not simultaneously, but close enough to matter. He said Yvette had framed those overlaps as transitional, not deceitful. That distinction was telling. It suggested a worldview where timing could sanitize intention. I did not ask for details. I had enough. What mattered was not the exact count, but the method. This had not been a collapse under pressure. It had been maintenance of parallel realities. By the end of the day, the wedding website was still live. I took it down myself. I replaced it with a simple message stating that the event had been canceled and that guests would be contacted individually regarding refunds and arrangements. I did not include explanations. Explanations invited debate. The response was immediate. Messages poured in. Some expressed concern. Some demanded clarity. A few, unexpectedly, expressed relief. That last category surprised me until I realized what it meant. Others had seen the tension long before I had been forced to. Yvette came by the apartment that evening, unannounced. I did not stop her from entering. I also did not invite her to sit. She spoke carefully, aware now that the situation had moved beyond private repair. She wanted to understand what I planned to do next. I told her that the plans were no longer joint, that I would handle the logistics tied to my name and finances, that she would handle the rest. I told her the wedding was off, not postponed, off. She tried to argue that this was premature, that we owed it to ourselves to slow down. I told her that slowing down had been an option months ago. That option was gone. Her composure faltered again, not into tears, but into something sharper. She accused me of making things public, of escalating unnecessarily. I pointed out that the situation had already been public to everyone except me, that silence would have only preserved that imbalance. She left without another word. That night, I received confirmation emails from vendors acknowledging the cancellation. There were penalties, significant ones, but they were finite. Unlike the alternative, the next morning brought a new development. A mutual acquaintance forwarded me a message chain circulating in a group I was not part of. It speculated about the breakup, offering theories that ranged from generous to insulting. What mattered was not the content, but the source. Someone inside Yvette's circle had shared partial truths without context. I decided then that I would not allow speculation to fill the vacuum. I sent a single, measured message to a group that included close friends and immediate family on both sides. I outlined the sequence of events factually, without commentary. I attached no screenshots. I named no motives. I ended by stating that the wedding was canceled and that I would not be discussing details further. The response was mixed, but the effect was immediate. The narrative stabilized. People stopped guessing. They started processing. Rourke faced consequences of his own soon after. His involvement became known beyond our circle, reaching into professional spaces where discretion mattered. I did not orchestrate that. I did not need to. Information traveled faster than intent. Yvette's attempts at damage control intensified. She contacted vendors, friends, even distant relatives, offering explanations that shifted depending on the audience. The inconsistencies became visible. The effort to contain them became exhausting. By the end of the week, the apartment felt different. Not emptier, but quieter in a way that suggested permanence. I boxed up items that were not mine and set them aside. I changed passwords. I separated accounts. Each task was small, but together they formed a clean line. Lior called again, this time to apologize without qualifiers. He said he had underestimated the harm of assuming I was aware. He said he understood now that neutrality had functioned as endorsement. I accepted the apology without ceremony. Holding on to resentment felt inefficient. As the days passed, the consequences settled into place. Invitations were returned. Travel plans were canceled. Families recalibrated. The future we had advertised dissolved into administrative reality. What surprised me most was not the loss, but the clarity. Betrayal had stripped away ambiguity. It had forced decisions that comfort would have delayed indefinitely. One evening, as I reviewed the final cancellation confirmation, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. It was brief. It stated that there were more screenshots, more conversations, more evidence of overlap. It asked if I wanted them. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied that I did not. I had reached the point where accumulation no longer added value. The collapse had already occurred. What remained was consequence, not proof. And consequence was already doing its work. By the time the last confirmations arrived, the situation no longer felt volatile. It felt settled, in the way a storm feels settled once the damage is done and the wind has moved on. There were no more revelations waiting to ambush me. No hidden angles demanding attention. Everything important had already surfaced, and what remained was the work of living with it. I focused on closing loops. The landlord needed notice. The lease had clauses that assumed continuity, not rupture, but clauses did not argue when presented with facts. I arranged to keep the apartment temporarily while alternatives were discussed. Yvette did not contest it. She no longer had leverage to do so, and I suspect she understood that pushing would only expose more than she could afford. Financial separation followed. Shared accounts were divided according to contributions, documented cleanly. There were no last-minute withdrawals, no spiteful gestures. The absence of theatrics made the process faster. Banks preferred clarity to emotion. So did I. Family reactions unfolded unevenly. My parents remained steady, disappointed but practical. They asked about timelines, about next steps, about how to support without hovering. Her family was quieter at first. Then messages arrived, tentative and restrained, asking for context. I responded once, briefly, with the same factual outline I had already shared elsewhere. I did not engage beyond that. Repetition did not create understanding. It only prolonged contact. Yvette attempted one final conversation a few days later. She framed it as closure, though it felt more like an appeal for narrative revision. She wanted acknowledgement that the situation had been complicated on both sides. She wanted reassurance that she was not the sole author of the outcome. I told her that outcomes did not require authorship to exist. They followed from choices, whether acknowledged or not. I told her that I was not interested in assigning moral weight beyond what was already evident. I told her that we were finished discussing the past. She accepted that with visible difficulty. Not anger, not pleading. Something closer to resignation. The understanding that explanation had lost its audience. Word continued to circulate, but it changed in texture. Early speculation gave way to quiet conclusions. People adjusted their behavior without announcements. Invitations to joint events stopped arriving. Separate social paths emerged naturally. Some friendships dissolved. Others clarified. The ones that remained felt less performative. Rourke's situation resolved itself without my involvement. His professional environment proved less forgiving than his personal one. Discretion, it turned out, had been assumed rather than practiced. Consequences arrived there as well, not catastrophic, but corrective. Enough to be felt. Yvette's professional life became more complicated. Not because of formal reprimand, but because trust functioned as currency in her field. When credibility wavered, opportunities hesitated. She attempted to rebuild quickly, too quickly. People noticed. Patience, like trust, could not be demanded. I did not monitor her life closely. Updates reached me indirectly, stripped of urgency. That distance was intentional. Attention was a resource, and I had learned how easily it could be misused. The practical end of the wedding arrived quietly. Refunds processed. Penalties absorbed. The final vendor confirmed closure. The date that had once felt monumental passed like any other day, marked only by a brief awareness that it could have been different. That awareness did not hurt. It clarified. I reorganized my routines, changed gyms, took on projects that required focus rather than distraction, not as escape, but as redirection. The energy that had once gone into maintaining a fragile illusion now had somewhere else to go. One evening, weeks later, I ran into Lior again. The interaction was brief and polite. He did not attempt to revisit the past. He did not ask how I was coping. He seemed to understand that the appropriate response to consequence was respect for its finality. That, more than apology, mattered. Looking back, the most unsettling realization was not the betrayal itself, but how easily it had been normalized within a group context. How quickly assumptions replaced communication. How silence masqueraded as neutrality. Those dynamics did not dissolve with the relationship. They became lessons that extended beyond it. I did not emerge vindicated or triumphant. Those narratives belonged to stories that needed resolution through spectacle. This one resolved through subtraction. Removal of ambiguity. Removal of shared pretense. Removal of futures that had been built on incomplete truths. Months later, when people asked what had happened, I answered simply. The engagement ended because it no longer reflected reality. Most accepted that without follow-up. The ones who did not were not people I needed to explain myself to. The Snapchat that had started everything remained on my phone for a long time. Not because I revisited it, but because deleting it felt unnecessary. It had served its purpose. Eventually, during a routine cleanup, it disappeared without ceremony. That felt appropriate. The consequences did not explode outward. They settled inward, shaping choices, narrowing options, redefining boundaries. They were not loud. They were durable. And in the end, durability mattered more than drama ever could.